Lesson 1. Migration is a growing global phenomenon that impacts individuals, families, and communities. Although migration is often thought of as an adult activity, migration by children and youth is quite common throughout the world and is on the rise. The United Nations estimates that approximately 16% of all international migrants are under the age of 20. Although this ranges considerably from a low of 11% in North America to just over 40% in Africa. One study comparing Argentina, Chile, and South Africa estimated that over 1/4 of all migrants are children under the age of 18. Children migrate for many of the same reasons that adults migrate. They move toward jobs or better education and away from poverty and conflict. In some cases, children are taken along as families migrate. Other children are in the lead of this migration, while still others follow subsequent to family members' migration. Traditionally, research on migration focused primarily on adults. When children were considered, it was as passive members of their guardians' journeys. Increasingly, scholars are recognizing the role of children in the migration process itself. This includes recognizing children's agency in the migration process rather than viewing them as incidentally impacted by the migration decisions of others. Children may be part of migration through several avenues. They may migrate with their parents. They may migrate alone. Children may be left behind when parents migrate or may live in an area impacted by the in-migration of others. The extent to which child migration is problematic may depend on the context and the age at migration. One important distinction may be made between young children's migration, up to age 15, and youth migration, 16 to 24 years. Youth migration is often motivated by expected changes associated with the entrance to adulthood. Adolescents and young adults, for example, may move to assume adult roles, such as spouse or breadwinner. Young children, on the other hand, are normatively viewed as dependents in need of care and are expected to remain under adult custody, supervision, and protection. The entry of young children into labor migration, for example, is inconsistent with international laws and policies enacted to prevent child labor. Another important distinction when considering the effects of migration on children is the type of migration under investigation: internal migration, moves within national borders, or international migration, moves across national borders. Both types of migration have been on the rise across the globe and may be motivated by similar factors. Internal migration is often typified by moves from rural to urban areas, particularly in the case of labor migration. Similarly, international migration is often typified by moves from less economically developed regions to areas of growth and ongoing development. However, migration across international borders is more likely to involve multiple legal and political entities. This may complicate the ease of movement between communities of origin and settlement and have implications for prolonged family separation or the opportunity for family reconstitution. Finally, the consequences of migration for children also depend on the forces that encourage such moves. The decision to migrate may be prompted by many factors, but an additional distinction may be made between voluntary and involuntary migration. Voluntary migration is undertaken for family formation, to find employment, to attend school, and for many other reasons. Voluntary international migration is often spurred by economic needs. Labor migrants leave their origin communities in search of better work opportunities. Children participate in this form of migration not only as the dependent family members of adult labor migrants, but as labor migrants themselves, particularly in the case of adolescents. Unaccompanied minors account for an increasingly large component of the migrant population. These children may be labor migrants or seeking reunification with family members who migrated ahead of them. Migration may also be motivated by conflict or natural disaster. Scholars typically define such movement as forced migration or involuntary migration. In this case, depending on the political circumstances, the migrants may be identified as political refugees. Note that involuntary migration may also include internally displaced people who do not cross national boundaries. Involuntary migration is more likely to involve multiple generations as entire families and communities are uprooted. But there is regional variation in this case. Many lone child refugees are located in parts of Asia and Africa. For example, more than half of the 15,500 unaccompanied children seeking asylum in 2010 came from Afghanistan and Somalia combined. Children may benefit from migration in several ways. For child migrants, moving away from conflict, scarcity of natural resources, or poverty can improve safety and living standards. And children are often active participants in the migration decision as they seek to gain access to education or employment, or to reunite with family members. Children also play an active role in the settlement process. They serve as language brokers for their immigrant households, translating and interpreting with service providers, teachers, and others in the receiving community. For many children, migration leads to greater opportunities and socioeconomic mobility than would have been possible if they had remained in the community of origin. Research on the well-being of children following voluntary migration, however, yields mixed results. Children moving from rural areas to more urban or developed areas are likely to see improved access to healthcare and education. Yet, even if they migrate with parents, children may experience housing instability, discrimination, lack of state recognition, and other barriers that limit access to education and full participation in the receiving community. Research focused on the educational success of immigrant children, for example, points to great variation across settlement countries, which makes it difficult to generalize the extent to which immigration improves or disadvantages children's educational outcomes. Overall, then, children become migrants for a variety of reasons, and the consequences of this migration also vary depending on the age and family circumstances of the child, the motivation for migrating, the resources available, and the geopolitical context in which the migration is occurring. There have been several international calls to recognize the rights and vulnerabilities of migrant children and youths, although many are still vulnerable to exploitation and danger on their journeys. However, children's migration may also bring greater opportunity, and the hope of a better life continues to propel children, youths, and their families to undertake their journeys. Lesson 2. Using NASA's Kepler Space Telescope, astronomers have discovered the first Earth-sized planet orbiting in the habitable zone of another star. The planet, named Kepler 186f, orbits an M-dwarf, or red dwarf, a class of stars that makes up 70% of the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. The discovery of Kepler 186f confirms that planets the size of Earth exist in the habitable zone of stars other than our Sun. The habitable zone is defined as the range of distances from a star where liquid water might pool on the surface of an orbiting planet. While planets have previously been found in the habitable zone, these are all at least 40% larger in size than Earth, and understanding their makeup is challenging. Kepler 186f seems to be more similar to Earth. Kepler 186f orbits its parent M-dwarf star once every 130 days and receives one-third the energy that Earth gets from the Sun, placing it near the outer edge of the habitable zone. On the surface of Kepler 186f, the brightness of its star at high noon is only as bright as our Sun appears to us about an hour before sunset. M-dwarfs are the most numerous stars, said Elisa Quintana, research scientist at the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute at NASA's Ames Research Center in Moffett Field, California, and lead author of the paper published today in the journal Science. The first signs of other life in the galaxy may well come from planets orbiting an M-dwarf. However, being in the habitable zone does not mean we know this planet is habitable, cautions Thomas Barclay, research scientist at the Bay Area Environmental Research Institute at Ames and co-author of the paper. The temperature on the planet is strongly dependent on what kind of atmosphere the planet has. Kepler 186f can be thought of as an Earth cousin rather than an Earth twin. It has many properties that resemble Earth. Kepler 186f resides in the Kepler 186 system, about 500 light-years from Earth, in the constellation Cygnus. The system is also home to 4 companion planets: Kepler 186b, Kepler 186c, Kepler 186d, and Kepler 186e, race around their Sun every 4, 7, 13, and 22 days, respectively, making them too hot for life as we know it. These 4 inner planets all measure less than 1.5 times the size of Earth. Although the size of Kepler 186f is known, its mass and composition are not. Previous research, however, suggests that a planet the size of Kepler 186f is likely to be rocky. The discovery of Kepler 186f is a significant step toward finding worlds like our planet Earth, said Paul Hertz, NASA's Astrophysics Division Director at the agency's headquarters in Washington. The next steps in the search for distant life include looking for Earth twins, Earth-sized planets orbiting within the habitable zone of a Sun-like star, and measuring their chemical compositions. The Kepler Space Telescope, which simultaneously and continuously measured the brightness of more than 150,000 stars, is NASA's first mission capable of detecting Earth-sized planets around stars like our Sun. Looking ahead, Hertz said, future NASA missions, like the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite and the James Webb Space Telescope, will discover the nearest rocky exoplanets and determine their composition and atmospheric conditions, continuing humankind's quest to find truly Earth-like worlds. Lesson 3. Why do we give books to children? Common answers to that question involve the use of words like expand, open, or broaden, followed by minds, hearts, horizons, or imaginations. It is sad, then, that many books for children do just the opposite. They peddle stereotypes, close minds to new experiences, and offer limited horizons. The Let Toys Be Toys campaign, which last year persuaded 13 retailers to remove boys and girls signs from their stores, is working with other not-for-profit organizations, including Letterbox Library, Inclusive Minds, and For Books' Sake, to persuade the publishing industry to drop these labels from books. The Let Books Be Books campaign asks children's publishers to stop labeling children's activity books, storybooks, and coloring books as for boys or for girls. Children are individuals. They should feel free to choose their own interests, not feel that they are supposed to like or reject certain things. Anyone who chooses a gift based only on a child's gender is making some massive and quite likely wrong assumptions about what that child may like. Campaign supporters regularly complain about boy and girl books that have predictably lazy stereotypes on the cover. These books are usually coloring books, sticker books, and activity books. Stories for boys and stories for girls are also common. Classic novels, great for all children to read, are put together with the words girls or boys slapped on the box. Separate cookery books seem particularly ridiculous, the suggestion being that boys eat pizza and burgers while girls prefer pink iced cupcakes. We've even seen versions of the Bible for girls and for boys. Typical themes for boys include robots, dinosaurs, astronauts, vehicles, football, and pirates, whereas typical themes for girls are princesses, fairies, makeup, flowers, butterflies, fashion, and cute animals. There's nothing wrong with these things, but it is wrong when they are repeatedly presented as only for one gender. Girls can like pirates and adventure. Boys can like magic and dressing up. Why tell them otherwise? Why tell them that boys' and girls' interests never overlap? That there are greater differences between genders than between individuals? It is accepted practice to target products at one segment of the population, but when it comes to children's books, it is morally questionable to promote gender stereotypes. Children take messages about what's for girls or for boys seriously. Books should give children the chance to explore new things and ideas, and labeling books and certain subjects as only for one gender prevents them from doing this, says Alexandra Strick of children's literature project Inclusive Minds. Her co-founder, Beth Cox, adds, "These books reinforce stereotypes about what it means to be a boy or a girl, and therefore make children who don't follow these stereotypes more vulnerable to bullying and at risk of low self-esteem." The campaign also aims to raise discussion on wider issues concerned with gender and children's books, such as the fact that male characters still exceed female characters by 2 to 1 in children's picture books, or the belief often expressed by publishers that boys won't read books with girl leads. These issues are connected to a wider culture of inequality. The creator of For Books' Sake, Jane Bradley, says, "From gendered children's coloring books to book covers with illustrations of handbags and cupcakes, the publishing industry aggressively reinforces conventional gender roles to its readers from childhood onwards." This gendered marketing establishes and sustains limiting, old-fashioned stereotypes, and we believe it's time for the publishing industry to put it where it belongs, in the past. Carrie Mason, co-director of the not-for-profit social enterprise Letterbox Library, agrees. At Letterbox Library, we have spent the last 30 years selecting books which give children the widest possible choices in what they read. Our selection is increasingly being threatened by a type of marketing which uses book labeling and covers which restrict a book's readership. We simply cannot stock books marketed in this way. Gendered marketing is anti-choice, and, for us at least, there really is no profit in it, nor is there much respect for the children in it. Lesson 4. Dinosaurs weren't quite like cold-blooded reptiles, but they weren't like warm-blooded birds either. Instead, they fell right in the middle. Comparisons with modern animals reveal that dinosaurs' metabolisms probably resembled those of great white sharks, researchers report in the June 13th Science. The findings offer new clues into how the animals lived and also rekindle a long-standing debate. This paper will make us go back to the drawing board, says paleobiologist Martin Sander of the University of Bonn in Germany. For years, paleontologists assumed that dinosaurs most resembled modern reptiles and other cold-blooded creatures, or ectotherms, slow-growing, low-energy sluggards that bask in sunlight for heat and don't need much food. When I was a kid, dinosaurs were just scaled-up, tail-dragging reptilian brutes, says Gregory Erickson, a paleobiologist at Florida State University in Tallahassee. The field took a U-turn in the 1960s, he says, when researchers started to find similarities between dinosaurs and modern birds. Over the next few decades, most paleontologists came to think of dinosaurs as more bird-like, warm-blooded animals, or endotherms, that grew quickly, expended lots of energy, and regulated their body heat internally. That thinking inspired popular depictions, such as the speedy beasts of Jurassic Park. But trying to fit dinosaurs into one of two categories might be too simplistic, says John Grady, a paleoecologist at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. Previous work had hinted that the animals might not sort so cleanly into either group. So Grady and colleagues designed a massive study to pinpoint dinosaurs' place on the spectrum of cold and warm-blooded life. His team tabulated the growth rates and energy use, or metabolism, of 353 modern animal species. The census included everything from slow-growing, low-metabolism crocodiles to fast-growing, high-metabolism ostriches. Then the researchers capitalized on other paleontologists' careful analysis of dinosaur bones to collect the growth rates of 21 dinosaurs, including Tyrannosaurus and Apatosaurus. Grady and his team couldn't determine the metabolic rates of creatures that have been extinct for at least 65 million years, but they could make estimates based on data from living animals. When Grady plotted the animals' growth rates against their metabolisms, he found a clear link. Those with high growth rates tended to have high metabolisms, and vice versa. This strong correlation allowed him to chart the 21 dinosaurs on the same graph. The animals fell right between cold-blooded animals and warm-blooded ones. I was a little surprised to see dinosaurs in the middle, Grady says. If they're not like reptiles and they're not like mammals, then what the heck are they? Dinosaurs did match up with a few living animals. T-Rex and other dinosaurs may have had metabolisms similar to those of great white sharks, tuna, and leatherback sea turtles, Grady says. These animals, called mesotherms, eat more than cold-blooded fish and reptiles do, but they don't stick tightly to a set body temperature like warm-blooded birds and mammals. Understanding dinosaurs' metabolic peculiarities could offer clues into other debated aspects of the animals' lives, such as how they hunted and why they grew so large, Grady says. Lesson 5. Is a nation's destiny set by its birth rates? The announcement that Japan's population fell by almost 250,000 in 2013, the fifth consecutive annual fall, brought warnings that the country may be in terminal decline. The economic decline that occurred during Japan's so-called lost decades is a symptom of problems brought on by demographic change, wrote Reiko Aoki, an economist at Hitotsubashi University in Tokyo last year. Japan has the world's oldest population, with a median age of 46 years, an average lifespan of 84, and a quarter of the population over 65. But this doesn't have to mean a gloomy future. What happens in the coming years might even point the way for other countries. Japanese longevity can't compensate for its ultra-low fertility rate, just 1.4 children per woman. Hard-working Japanese society has embraced voluntary mass childlessness, says Nicholas Eberstadt, a demographer at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. 1 in 4 don't have children. Some European countries also have low fertility rates, but they have migrants who move in and make up for the loss. Japan doesn't. The conventional view is that this is bad news for 2 reasons. Shrinking numbers slow down economic growth, and the aging population is a major financial burden. But Eberstadt says there is another side. The proportion of Japan's population that is dependent on those of working age isn't unusual, he says. It's just that it has almost twice as many people over 65 as children. Consequently, Japan spends less on education, and because the Japanese are the world's healthiest, medical bills are also lower than in other nations. Japan's economy has been growing slowly for 2 decades now, but this is not necessarily bad news for its workforce, says William Klein of the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington, D.C. Thanks to the falling population, individual income has been rising strongly, outperforming most U.S. citizens. With 127 million people, Japan is hardly empty. But fewer people in the future will mean that it will have more living space, more land per head for growing crops, and a higher quality of life, says Eberstadt. Its demands on the environment for food and other resources will also lessen. Japan isn't alone in its demographic decline. Russia, Romania, and Hungary all follow the trend. For many more, it is being delayed by immigration. But the global population bomb is not likely to explode due to growing numbers of people. As Swedish statistician Hans Rosling first noted, the world recently reached peak child, the point where the number of children aged 0 to 14 around the globe has reached a steady level and is therefore no longer rising. Global birth rates have halved in 40 years. They are now below 2.5 children per woman, meaning that global population may also peak soon. So far from being a demographic exception, Japan is the world leader in demographic change, says Aoki. For some, this sounds like a disaster. China last year relaxed its one-child policy, fearing that predicted population decline in the 2030s would cause its impressive economic growth to come to a sudden stop. But others believe that peak population is a necessary first step to reducing our attack on the Earth's life support systems. In that case, following Japan's example may be the right answer for many countries around the world. Lesson 6. More and more companies from fields other than medical services are entering the market for genetic testing, which makes it possible for people to easily find out the risks of their developing certain types of diseases, such as cancer and diabetes. It is necessary for people to correctly understand the nature of genetic testing available, including its accuracy, before they decide to undergo the tests. Recent entrants into the market include internet firms like Yahoo and DNA. The number of companies offering genetic testing services more than doubled from 340 in 2009 to around 740 in 2012. Many more companies are planning to enter the business because genetic testing services are not a medical activity and does not require a license. The companies, which are providing what is considered to be an information service, entrust the job of actual examination of genes to testing institutes. Still, commercialization of the services carries some problems. The selling point of commercial genetic testing is that by sending a mouth swab sample to a testing institute, one can know his or her risks of developing various diseases. The biggest issue is the accuracy of such tests. A genetic testing venture, 23andMe, in which Google has invested, has started offering the Personal Genome Service to provide health reports on 254 diseases and conditions for slightly less than $100. But the U.S. Food and Drug Administration in November 2013 ordered the company to halt the sales of its saliva collection kit due to concerns over the accuracy of its genetic examinations. People need to be aware that the results of genetic testing only have a high degree of correlation with the risks for certain diseases. In addition to genes, acquired factors such as diet, smoking, drinking, stress, lack of sleep, and lack of exercise are also responsible for some diseases, including cancer. Users of genetic testing services should know that the discovery in genetic examinations of the presence of irregularities that raise the risk of developing certain diseases does not necessarily mean they will develop them. So, it is not wise to rely solely on genetic testing. The results of testing may cause some people to be unduly pessimistic about their future. The providers of genetic testing services must be careful when explaining test results to people. The providers also should handle data on individual examinees' genes with utmost care because they are personal information. Leakage of such data must be prevented at any cost. There are moves among testing institutes to use data from genetic testing for research purposes. There must be no lapses in the management of data. The government needs to quickly set down rules to ensure the reliability of commercial genetic testing. At the very least, providers of such services should be required to make clear to users the purpose and limits of tests, their possible disadvantages, and the scientific grounds of their clinical usefulness, as well as company policy on handling personal information, including genetic data acquired from the test and the relevant information on testing institutes.